there's a bit of a quick and dirty way as well, but emphasis on dirty because it's going to be very, very indirect. But one is simply, do you have high blood pressure? If you have high blood pressure, it's very likely you have insulin resistance. I know that's a very kind of dramatic statement for what's a fairly common problem, but it really holds true. Um, or you can do some circumference measurements. Measure the biggest part around your belly. And if you multiply that number by 2, and if that number is higher than your height, that's a problem. Let me say that again in a slightly different way. Measure your height, then measure your waist circumference times 2. If your waist circumference times 2 is a bigger number than your height, that suggests you're storing fat in an unhealthy way, and it would likely be contributing to insulin resistance. If your height is a bigger number than your waist circumference times 2, that suggests that you're likely doing fine. All right, now let's really dive into the solutions here. Firstly, let me just remind you of the 3 primary causes of insulin resistance: stress, inflammation, and hyperinsulinemia. The problem with stress and inflammation is that it can be difficult to change those numbers because you don't know what's causing them. Let's say you measured your epinephrine or adrenaline or your cortisol as stress hormone markers, and you had a marker of inflammation like C-reactive protein, and it was high. You might not necessarily know how to lower them. It's not clear what's contributing to them. So just for the sake of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on those, other than perhaps to say, when it comes to stress, very, very often poor sleep is going to be the main aggravator. If it's not sleep, then it's likely going to be excessive caffeine consumption, which can increase your epinephrine or adrenaline numbers. So perhaps a reason to focus on sleep and better sleep habits, and be mindful of your caffeine consumption. All right, now the elevated insulin. This is the one to focus on because it can yield such immediate results. Now, in talking about the elevated insulin, I wanted to frame this in a bit of a metaphor, where if we think of an insulin sensitizing lifestyle change, we can think of it as a journey. And as we stand at the beginning of this journey, with the end result being, I want to reduce my insulin, or to say that another way, the end result being I want to shrink my fat cells. Because remember, progressive pathogenic insulin resistance is usually starting at the fat cell because the fat cells are growing too big. They're undergoing hypertrophy. So the solution then simply, well, simple in concept, if not practice, is to shrink those fat cells. So there we are at the beginning of this fat cell shrinking journey. We have 2 feet. We can take one of 2 steps first. Each of these steps could be reflected in 2 different ideas, namely calories and insulin. The traditional view of improving insulin sensitivity through shrinking fat cells or weight loss is the caloric view, namely eat less, exercise more. So that's the first step that most people take, with no regard on insulin. But let's say the person is going into this journey with elevated insulin, as virtually all of them would be. And if you take a first step where reducing the calories coming in is the first step and insulin is not dropping quickly, that creates a bit of an energetic crisis for the following reasons. If less energy is coming in and insulin is still elevated, then insulin is pushing whatever energy is available in your blood out of your blood, pushing it to be stored in tissues throughout the body, like fat tissue, like muscle tissue, like liver, etc. All of these tissues that are now being told to store the energy. Unfortunately, the brain doesn't store energy. It really needs to rely almost constantly on any energy that's being provided from the blood. In other words, what are the calories in the blood that can feed the brain? And if less calories are coming in, but insulin is a little sticky and it's staying elevated because you're just dropping your fat consumption to lower calories, but you're still eating plenty of carbs because they're lower calorie, which is what everybody does on a low calorie diet. It's always cut the fat, which won't affect insulin at all, and focus on the carbs, which will increase insulin. So they are restricting calories coming in, but in the presence of high insulin, the limited calories that are available in the blood are being pushed into cells. And so the brain, who must constantly rely on the blood for its energy, is looking at the reduced energy in the blood, and it panics. And it starts to tell the body, you need to eat.